The High Council chamber of the Galactic Empire loomed before Commander Jarek Solan like a prison of stone and steel. His boots resounded sharply against the cold, polished floor as he strode forward, each step ringing in the eerie silence. The air tasted sterile, frigid, perfectly engineered for the Empire's comfort, but suffocating to him. Every corner, every surface in this hall screamed of power and control, power that had once seemed invincible. Now, the galaxy would see what happened when that power was threatened. Jarek's eyes, hardened by years of conflict, swept over the assembly of alien dignitaries. Thousands of eyes, glistening with malice, curiosity, or indifference, fixed on him. Their species were all different. Some insectoid, others crystalline, many of them humanoid, but twisted in subtle ways. Each of them watched with a mixture of amusement and distaste, their comfortable superiority evident in the way they leaned back in their seats, their forms lounging in relaxed arrogance. At the center of it all sat Lord Vrax, the High Arbiter of the Empire. A towering figure with iridescent scales and 6 yellow eyes, Vrax's smile was predatory, like a beast playing with its food. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as Jarek approached. He was everything Jarek despised, cold, calculating, and dismissive, but Jarek would not flinch. He stopped in the center of the chamber, a mere 20 feet from the raised dais where the council sat. His heart beat steady as ever, though his muscles burned with the weight of the moment. The silence thickened as he prepared to speak. He had only one chance to make this count. Esteemed members of the High Council, Jarek's voice sliced through the quiet, calm, and unyielding. I stand before you not as a mere emissary, but as the harbinger of humanity's wrath. The chamber's atmosphere thickened, the reverberating hum of alien voices slowly dying down as all eyes turned toward him. Jarek felt the pressure of their gaze, the cold judgment of species that had never once been forced to reckon with a threat from one of their own. He was but a human, and to them, that meant little. But his words would change that. You've shattered our colonies, burned our homes, and slaughtered our people, Jarek continued, his voice steady and edged with the bitter weight of the losses humanity had suffered. And yet, you still believe you can break us. The council members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, exchanging glances that betrayed their initial disregard for the human. The silent tension crackled through the air as Jarek let his words sink in. He was no diplomat. He was not here to negotiate or to beg for mercy. This was something else entirely. A low chuckle broke through the silence. Lord Vrax's lips curled into a cruel smile, his 6 eyes gleaming with mockery. Is this what passes for a threat among your kind? Human? His voice was low, a rumbling growl that reverberated through the chamber, heavy with disdain. Do you truly think you stand any chance against the might of the Empire? The laughter that followed rippled through the council like a wave crashing against jagged rocks. Vrax leaned back in his seat, clearly relishing the moment. Jarek, unfazed, stood tall, his eyes never leaving the High Arbiter. He let their amusement wash over him, just as he let the grief of his people's losses wash over him. He had nothing to prove to them. The moment he had walked into this room, he had already won. You've crossed a line, Jarek said, his tone sharp, final. And when you cross a line, there's no going back. The laughter faltered. For the first time, the Empire's council looked unsure, their amusement replaced by a subtle, creeping discomfort. Even Vrax's smugness flickered for a moment, but it was gone too quickly to register fully. He leaned forward again, his posture still radiating superiority. Do you think yourself clever, human? Vrax sneered, his voice a dangerous hiss now. You are nothing but an infant in this vast galaxy, a fleeting spark destined to be snuffed out by the coldness of our will. You and your kind are not worthy of this galaxy's attention. Jarek felt his muscles tighten, his grip on his emotions strained, but he held firm. "I know what you think of us. You think us weak. You think we will fold beneath your heel just as countless others have. But you've miscalculated. We may not have your fleets, your weaponry, or your centuries of dominance, but we have something you'll never understand." His voice dropped lower, each word carefully measured. "We have resolve, and you've just awakened it." Vrax's grin faltered for a fraction of a second, but then his composure returned. He waved dismissively toward Jarek. "This, then, is your threat?" "Your species, barely out of its cradle, telling us that we will regret our actions." His voice was filled with scorn, dripping with superiority. "You have no power here. Your threat is empty." Jarek took a step forward, closing the distance. His voice dropped to a near whisper, but every word sliced through the air with the force of a blade. "You will regret this, Vrax. The Empire has crossed the line, and you will pay for it." The silence that followed was thick enough to cut through. Even Vrax's smirk flickered, though it was gone as quickly as it came. The council members shifted, murmuring among themselves in hushed tones. Some of them, those who were less sure of the Empire's invincibility, seemed to consider Jarek's words for the first time. "You mistake us for a species of cowards," Jarek continued, his voice now ice-cold. "We may have been silent for too long, but that changes today. Humanity's final message to the Empire is this: you will pay for what you've done." Vrax stood abruptly, his massive frame towering over the room as his 6 eyes locked on Jarek. For a moment, Jarek could see the slightest flicker of unease in the High Arbiter's gaze, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. Vrax's voice thundered across the chamber, dripping with venom. "Leave now, human, before we decide your species' fate." Jarek didn't flinch. "You'll have to make that decision yourself," he said quietly, his eyes narrowing. "But you should know this. No matter what you decide, the war has already begun. Humanity will never bow to your empire." Without another word, Jarek turned and strode from the chamber, the heavy doors closing behind him with a final resonating thud. The council's laughter echoed in the distance, but it was already hollow, fading into the air like the last gasps of a dying beast. The message had been delivered. The Empire would soon learn what it meant to face humanity's defiance. The echo of the High Council's doors closing behind Jarek still hummed in his ears as he made his way down the sterile corridors of the Imperial complex. Each step carried the weight of his ultimatum, but it was far from over. The moment he had walked out of that chamber, the real battle had begun. He didn't know what Vrax would do next, but Jarek had no intention of waiting for the Empire to strike first. Behind his confident exterior, a storm of thoughts churned. The Empire might have underestimated humanity's resolve, but Jarek was acutely aware of the distance they still had to cover. They could not face the Empire head-on. Not yet. But they would fight. Humanity always did. Jarek entered the war room, a sparse, angular space illuminated by the blue glow of laser plasma displays. His breath steadied as he glanced at the massive head-up displays blinking with live feeds of their forces. Officers stood at attention, their faces set, aware that the war was no longer just a distant concern. It had arrived at their doorstep. Admiral Caden Voss was at the center of the room, his sharp, hawk-like eyes scanning a map of Imperial-held space. The flickering lights of the heads-up displays cast shadows across his weathered face. He looked up at Jarek as he entered, offering a slight nod of recognition before focusing on the tasks at hand. "You spoke well," Voss said, his voice cool, measured, yet threaded with the tension of a man who had lived through countless battles. "But words only take us so far. We need to act. Fast." Jarek stepped forward, his boots clicking against the polished floor. "The Phantom Legion is ready. We strike first. Now." Voss raised an eyebrow, though his expression remained impassive. "Do you truly believe you can keep the Empire from retaliating? They'll come for us in full force." "We don't need to stop them completely," Jarek replied, his gaze shifting to the map. "We need to make them feel the weight of their arrogance. Every fleet they send after us, every patrol they deploy, we'll take them apart, piece by piece." Voss studied him for a long moment, the faintest flicker of approval in his eyes. He turned to the crew, his voice commanding, cutting through the room's tension. "Prepare the fleet. Full stealth mode. We leave in 1 hour." The Phantom Legion's fleet was cloaked in darkness, concealed against the backdrop of deep space. The ships, sleek and almost imperceptible, had been built with the latest stealth technology, developed in the shadows of human ingenuity beyond the Empire's notice. Their hulls were designed to absorb and refract the light around them, rendering them invisible to conventional sensors. In this silence, they would strike. Jarek stood on the command deck of the UEES Retribution, watching the crew work in perfect harmony. Their faces were grim, focused on their task, but their eyes held the same fire he saw in himself. They were here not just to fight, but to reclaim what the Empire had stolen. He turned to his first officer, Lieutenant Valen Thorn, who was manning the console. His fingers flew over the laser plasma display, feeding Jarek real-time data on the Empire's movements. "The Empire's fleet is en route to our sector," Thorn reported, his voice low but urgent. "5 ships, all heavily armored. They've detected us, Commander." Jarek's jaw tightened. "Then we move faster. Target their communications first. We don't need to destroy them. We need to cripple their ability to call reinforcements, disable their engines, cut off their path." Thorn nodded. "Understood." In the shadows of the Empire's sector, the first strike began. The Phantom Legion descended like ghosts from the dark, moving in perfect silence. The tension was palpable in the cold expanse of space. The enemy fleet was blind to the incoming assault, its focus solely on advancing through the territory they assumed was safe. Jarek's orders were executed with swift precision. Laser beams crackled across the dark void, striking at the engines and shields of the lead Imperial ship. The pulse of the shots split the darkness, leaving streaks of red across the cold nothingness. Within seconds, the Empire's ships faltered. One of them, a large warship, had its engine bank ruptured by a concentrated shot, sending it drifting helplessly into space. The crew scrambled, but it was too late. Their communications had been severed, their chances of escape dwindling. Jarek's voice came through the comms, cold and deliberate. "This is a message to the Empire. You have no control here." The Phantom Legion's assault was swift, efficient, a surgical strike that left the Empire reeling. One by one, their ships fell, unable to respond to the sudden and overwhelming attack. It was chaos for them, disorientation, fear, and confusion all running through their ranks. But for the Legion, it was calculated, controlled, methodical. Jarek's hands clenched around the console as the last ship in the group faltered, its shields down and systems scrambling. "Finish them, but don't destroy. Let them live with the consequences of their arrogance." Back at the command center, the crew worked seamlessly. Lieutenant Thorn relayed the final reports, his tone now edged with disbelief. "They're not responding. The Empire's fleet is in disarray, Commander. We've crippled their communications. They're scattered across the sector." Jarek exhaled slowly, his eyes narrowing as he surveyed the damage. "Good. But this is only the beginning. We need to send a message. I want the Empire to know what it means to face an enemy they cannot see coming." Admiral Voss entered the room then, his expression unreadable, but his eyes gleamed with something between approval and the sharp edge of battle-hardened resolve. "We've set the tone. Now we watch. If they come after us in full force, we'll be ready. But if they don't..." Jarek looked back at the display, his expression hardening. Then we hit them again. Harder. The Phantom Legion drifted back into the shadows, leaving behind the wreckage of Imperial ships and the slow, disorienting confusion that would ripple through their command structure. They had sent their message, but the fight was far from over. They had cracked open the door, but the real war was still waiting behind it. As the ships cloaked and vanished back into the silence of space, Jarek stood at the helm, staring out at the infinite void before them. For the first time, it felt like humanity had a place in this galaxy, not as pawns or forgotten relics, but as a force to be reckoned with. This was only the start, and the Empire would regret the day they decided to cross that line. The dark corridors of the UEE's retribution hummed with quiet intensity, the crew working in near silence as the adrenaline of their victory lingered in the air. Jarek stood at the command center, his eyes scanning the laser plasma displays that flickered with reports. The Empire's fleet, fractured and bleeding from the first blow, was still reeling. But the fight was far from over. Lieutenant Thorne approached, his expression tense as he tapped his console. "Commander, we've just intercepted a message from the Illyrian Collective. They've seen our strike, and they're interested." Jarek didn't move, his eyes locked on the displays showing the disarray of the Empire's fleet. "Interested in what?" "They want to join the fight," Thorne said, his voice low. "The Illyrians are neutral, but they've been watching us for some time. They believe in our defiance." Jarek felt a flicker of hope spark in his chest, but he quickly tempered it. "Can they hold their own?" Thorne glanced at the data streaming in front of him. "They're highly advanced. They've got the technology to back it up, but they want something in return, access to our tactical data and full cooperation on counter-operations." Jarek rubbed his jaw, thinking quickly. The Illyrians were not an unimportant ally, but trust was a currency as valuable as any weapon. "Make contact. Tell them we'll meet in neutral space, but no promises yet." It had only been a few hours since the first strike, but the ripples of humanity's defiance were already being felt across the galaxy. In every corner of the Empire's territories, the oppressed began to stir, waking from the decades of fear and silence that had bound them. The Empire's grip was weakening, and that weakness was a spark to which every species with a grievance now turned their attention. Jarek stood in the darkened meeting room of the Retribution, eyes narrowed as he listened to the encrypted transmission coming through. The screen was static for a moment, a thin flicker of interference distorting the image. Then the face of Korak, a Zorani rebel leader, appeared, his sharp angular features visible against the backdrop of a dimly lit ship. "Commander Solan," Korak began, his voice a rasp, filled with the weariness of years spent fighting in the shadows. "We've been waiting for this moment. We've heard the message loud and clear. Humanity is rising, and so are we." Jarek leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "What's your plan, Korak?" "We've already initiated the first phase. Our cells are active, hitting key supply lines and Imperial assets. It's not enough to destroy them. It's enough to slow them down. They're trying to maintain control, but they're already stretched thin. They've ignored us for too long." Jarek's jaw tightened. "Don't make this a revenge mission, Korak. We need allies, not scattered chaos." "I understand, Commander," Korak replied, his voice steady. "We'll coordinate with your forces. We need to hit them in their most vulnerable points, their communications, their supply lines, their leadership. The Empire will break when it begins to collapse from within." Jarek hesitated, glancing at the data streaming across the plasma displays. Every word Korak said made sense, but how much could they truly trust in these fractured alliances? The risk was enormous, but the reward might be even greater. "Coordinate with Lieutenant Thorne. We'll help direct your efforts." Korak's face hardened. "We'll make them pay for what they've done, not just for us, but for every planet they've subjugated." As the transmission ended, Jarek turned to Thorne, who was still standing at the command console. "Get our forces ready. We push forward with Korak's plan. But remember, every move has a cost. We need to hit them hard, but we can't afford to lose ourselves in this." Thorn nodded, his fingers flying over the console as he sent orders to the fleet. "Understood, Commander. We'll make it count." The next few days felt like a whirlwind. The Phantom Legion moved in and out of enemy sectors, striking from the shadows, hitting key targets with devastating efficiency. Rebel cells across the galaxy, Zorani, Illyrian, and others, joined in, each one carefully selected for their ability to disrupt Imperial infrastructure without overextending themselves. Jarek watched as the laser plasma displays lit up with reports. The Imperial response was swift and brutal, but it was also disjointed. The Empire was trying to maintain its control, but they were no longer in full command. Even the strongest of their fleets seemed to hesitate now, their arrogance rattled. "We've caught them off guard," Thorn said, his eyes glued to the console. "Their ships are on the move, but they're responding sluggishly. We've kept them divided long enough to strike again." Jarek nodded, feeling a surge of urgency. "We've made our mark. Now we need to turn that into a wave. Contact Korak. Let's make them feel this." The Phantom Legion and its allies hit the Empire's forces hard, coordinating their movements like a symphony of rebellion. The Empire's communications were fractured, their response times delayed as their fleets scattered across various sectors. The Empire's belief in their own invincibility began to crack, revealing the weakness that Jarek had known was there all along. Back in the heart of Imperial space, Lord Vrak stood at the helm of the Indomitable, a massive warship that now seemed to tremble beneath his grip. The orders he issued were cold, mechanical, but the fear in his voice was undeniable. "Dispatch every available fleet," Vrax commanded, his voice sharp. "They're not just striking from the shadows anymore. They're organizing. We cannot allow this to continue." He turned to his advisor, a silent insectoid figure standing at attention beside him. "I underestimated them," Vrax muttered. "But I will not make that mistake again. Send the message. If they want war, we will give them a war they will never forget." The advisor nodded, retreating to issue the orders. But as Vrax stood there, alone with his thoughts, something flickered in the back of his mind, a seed of doubt. Could they really stop the growing rebellion, or had humanity already set the stage for a galaxy-wide uprising? Jarek stood in front of the laser plasma displays, watching the tides of battle shift in real time. The rebellion was growing stronger with every passing moment. The Empire's response, though fierce, was increasingly erratic. Their arrogance had clouded their judgment, and now they were scrambling to regain control. But Jarek knew this was only the beginning. They had taken their first steps into the Empire's heart, but there was still much to be done. This war would not be won with just one strike. It would take everything they had, and more. "We keep pushing," Jarek said, his voice resolute. "The Empire is showing cracks, but we need to exploit them. We take their systems, we take their strength, and we burn the foundations of their empire to the ground." The crew around him moved with steady hands and fierce determination, a quiet acknowledgement of the risks they were all taking. But it was a shared resolve that bound them. For the first time, humanity stood not as the oppressed, but as the liberators, and the Empire would soon know the true cost of underestimating them. The retribution hung in the darkness, silent and concealed within the void. Its sleek hull absorbed the surrounding light, making it nearly invisible. On board, the tension was building again, the moments before the strike hanging like a sharp edge. Jarek stood at the command console, his hands resting on the hard surface. His eyes were fixed on the laser plasma displays, watching as the fleet's position updated in real time. The Empire had no idea what was coming. Not yet. Lieutenant Thorne's voice cut through the tension. "Commander, we've intercepted the Imperial fleet's movements. They're converging on our position, but they're still operating under the assumption that we're scattered." Jarek's lips curled into a small, knowing smile. They never learn. His gaze shifted to the tactical display where the Imperial ships were still positioned as if nothing had changed. "Give them a show. Start with their scouts." Thorn nodded, fingers tapping across the display. "Executing now." The ship's engines ignited, propelling the Retribution forward in a flash. The crew was already in motion, tracking every movement, coordinating with the rest of the Phantom Legion's fleet. Every light, every tactical decision was a calculated risk, but it was one they had to take. The enemy was moving closer, but they still thought they were in control. The first strike was swift and brutal. Imperial scouts, once confident in their numbers, found themselves under fire before they even realized they had been targeted. One ship's communications array was the first to go. A quiet flicker from a laser strike, and suddenly, the ship was cut off from the rest of the fleet. Panic rippled through their crew, but by then it was too late. "One down," Jarek muttered under his breath, never taking his eyes off the laser plasma displays. Now the rest. The second phase of the attack began. Small, targeted blasts hit the engines of the second scout ship, causing it to veer off course and drift into the void. Another ship lost to the shadows, but they were still far from the true target. Jarek knew that striking quickly and retreating into the darkness was their best chance for survival. They would hit the Empire again and again, each time harder, each time faster, until the balance of power shifted. "How long until their reinforcements arrive?" Jarek asked, turning to Thorn. 10 minutes, Commander," Thorn responded. "But we can't keep up this pace for long. Once they regroup, they'll launch an all-out assault." Jarek nodded grimly. "We won't give them the time." From the control deck, the crew worked in synchronized precision. Commander Solan's orders were clear, and every crew member knew their role. But as the attacks continued, something changed. The Empire's ships were starting to adapt. They were no longer simply confused. They were starting to look for patterns, to anticipate the next move. The attacks weren't landing with the same shock value. The Empire was learning. "Commander," Thorn called out, his voice tight with frustration, "they've adapted. Their fleet is moving in tighter formations now. They're preparing to counter our next strike." Jarek's hand clenched at the edge of the console. "Then we make sure they can't. All ships, rotate positions. We'll strike from a new vector, hard and fast." The Phantom Legion shifted its position in an instant. It wasn't just a change of direction. It was a complete reformation. The ships scattered and regrouped, using their advanced stealth technology to their advantage. The Empire's fleet now had no clear target, no specific direction to focus on. The new strike came from above, a sudden, violent surge of energy that cut through the Empire's shield like a blade. The first hit was on a massive transport vessel, a key link in their supply chain. As the ship's engines exploded, the chain of command across the Empire's forces fell into disarray. Their most reliable supply lines had been severed in one fell swoop. The Retribution pulled back into the darkness, the strike quick and efficient. Jarek's voice was cold, cutting through the comms. "Send the message. If they want to chase shadows, we'll give them a reason to." The Empire's response was swift, but it was too late. In the minutes that followed, the Phantom Legion's fleet kept shifting, staying one step ahead, while the Empire's ships became increasingly scattered. Their command was lost in confusion, each ship trying to account for the others, no longer unified. For the first time, they weren't in control. "Well done," Voss's voice came through Jarek's comms, though there was a note of cautious pride. "We've kept them off balance, but they'll retaliate, and they won't make the same mistakes twice." Jarek didn't respond immediately. His mind was already calculating the next step. They had done more than disrupt the Empire's tactics. They had sown doubt. But this battle wasn't over yet. The Empire would retaliate with overwhelming force. Jarek's eyes were locked on the data streaming in from the fleet. The enemy was already preparing their counteroffensive. The next few minutes would be crucial. Back at the heart of the Empire's fleet, Lord Vrax seethed as he watched his ships struggle against the relentless attacks. He stood at the control center of the Indomitable, his sharp claws gripping the edge of the console, his 6 eyes narrowed in fury. This human commander was proving more resilient than he had anticipated. "Lord Vrax," his communications officer said, voice trembling, "the fleet is in disarray. We've lost contact with 2 key ships, and our supply lines are failing. We can't regroup." Vrax's voice was low, almost a growl, as he turned toward the officer. "This will not be tolerated. We will destroy them." He slammed his fist into the console, causing a momentary flicker of static across the screens. "Prepare the full fleet. We are going after them. No more games. This ends today." Jarek felt the shift, the way the Empire's actions turned from confusion to determination. The full force of their fleet was coming. He had expected it. "We'll need to buy time," Jarek said, his voice hardening with the weight of their next challenge. "Thorn, initiate the decoy protocols. We need them chasing shadows again. And Voss, prepare the second wave. We strike once more, but this time we need to be ready for a counterattack." As Thorn's fingers worked swiftly over the display, setting the decoy ships in motion, Jarek's gaze never left the screen. The Empire was coming for them, but they wouldn't find the Legion so easily this time. "We hit them again," Jarek muttered, the fire in his voice unmistakable, "and we hit them harder." The battle was about to take on a new intensity, and the Empire would soon learn that underestimating humanity had been their gravest mistake yet. The tides were turning, and Jarek Solan would make sure they never turned back. Jarek Solan stood at the command center of the Retribution, his eyes scanning the laser plasma displays that painted the room with updates from across the fleet. The Empire's full retaliation had begun. He could feel the tide shift, the energy in the room shifting with it. It wasn't just the sense of impending battle, it was something deeper. A sense of inevitability. "Status?" Jarek asked, his voice cutting through the low hum of the operations room. Thorn, at the tactical console, didn't look up as his fingers danced across the controls. "The Empire's fleet is assembling for a direct confrontation, Commander. We've disrupted them for now, but they'll come for us in full force. Expect them within the hour." "Make sure they don't get the chance," Jarek said. "What's the status on our reinforcements?" Lieutenant Rila, another officer on the bridge, spoke up. "The Illyrians are en route, but they're not in position yet. We're going to have to hold our ground." Jarek nodded, unfazed. "We've held this long. We'll hold longer." Outside the Retribution, the dark expanse of space seemed almost indifferent to the chaos unfolding. The ships of the Phantom Legion moved like shadows, their movements deliberate and fluid. They had already given the Empire a glimpse of what they could do, but now it was time for the real fight. Jarek's thoughts remained focused on the unfolding confrontation. He was anticipating the Empire's next move. The first sign came as a pulse of light shot across the void, marking the arrival of the Empire's fleet. Their flagship, the Indomitable, was unmistakable. Massive, foreboding, its hull adorned with the insignia of the Empire. The Imperial warships flanked it in formation, but something about the movement felt off. There was an edge of desperation in their approach. They were coming fast, but they weren't confident. "Enemy fleet in position," Thorn reported, his voice cold. "They're deploying interceptors. We can't avoid them all." "Hold course," Jarek commanded. "We fight on our terms." The battle erupted almost immediately. The Retribution fired first, its cannons tearing into the advancing fleet with surgical precision. The ship's hull shook as the first blast hit, but it held firm. They weren't aiming to destroy the Empire's ships, just to cripple them. With each strike, the Imperial formations began to scatter, their ships turning erratically as their communications were severed by the Phantom Legion's brutal onslaught. "We've got one of their cruisers dead in the water," Thorn said, his voice tinged with satisfaction. "Good. Keep pushing. They're not ready for this." Jarek's eyes never left the plasma display. A flicker caught his attention. One of the Empire's warships had begun to alter its trajectory, heading directly toward them. It was bigger than the others, with weapons bristling along its sides. "Target that ship. Full force," Jarek ordered. The first few strikes tore through the shields of the Indomitable like paper. Their energy defenses flickered before collapsing entirely. The ship veered sharply to the right, trying to regroup, but the Phantom Legion wasn't going to give them the luxury of that. "They're disoriented, Commander," Thorne called out, watching the incoming data. "Their shields are down. Engines failing." Jarek gritted his teeth. "Take it down. Make them pay." The next series of shots hit the engines of the Indomitable, sending it careening into a nearby asteroid field. The massive warship's systems went dark, its once gleaming hull now left drifting, vulnerable. "One less target," Rila said, a small note of triumph in her voice. Jarek didn't share the sentiment. "Keep moving. We've only just begun." The Empire was staggering, but they weren't completely helpless. Their retaliatory fire began to surge as their ships regrouped. The first wave of interceptors came at them like a swarm of angry wasps, flanked by Imperial destroyers. Their weapons were more concentrated now, and they were adapting, firing in sync, trying to overwhelm the Legion's defenses. "Incoming fire, Commander!" Thorne shouted, his voice rising with the urgency. "We've got multiple interceptors targeting us." Jarek was already in motion, ordering evasive maneuvers. The Retribution twisted and turned, evading most of the incoming blasts, but not all. The ship shuddered under the force of a blast to its starboard side, lights flickering briefly. Jarek cursed under his breath. They needed more time. "Send a signal to the Illyrians," he barked. "We need their firepower, and we need it now." Just as it seemed the tide might turn against them, a new wave of ships appeared. The Illyrians had arrived. Their ships cut through the darkness like something out of myth, sleek, shimmering vessels that moved with grace and deadly intent. They came in at the perfect angle, catching the Empire off guard. Their energy shields flared as they engaged the Imperial destroyers, overwhelming them with bursts of advanced weaponry. "We've got backup," Rilla said, her voice filled with relief. Jarek allowed himself a brief breath before turning his focus back to the battle. "Target their commanders. Take out their leadership." The next few moments were a blur of light and sound, the battle intensifying as the Empire's ships faltered under the combined might of the Phantom Legion and the Illyrians. Jarek's ship unleashed wave after wave of calculated destruction. Every shot fired wasn't just to destroy, it was to leave a message. They weren't going anywhere, and they weren't going to lose. Back on the Indomitable, Lord Vrax's rage was barely contained. His eyes burned with fury as he watched his ship struggle. The loss of the flagship was crippling, but what frustrated him more was the fact that humanity's insurgency was growing stronger with every passing moment. "We cannot allow this," he hissed to his advisors. "They are making fools of us." One of his advisors, a tall insectoid being, stepped forward cautiously. "Lord Vrax, they are much more organized than we anticipated. We cannot just crush them. This is no simple rebellion." Vrax shot him a withering glare. "Then show me a solution, or I will do it myself." His voice dropped dangerously low, almost a growl. "Prepare for the final assault. They will pay for this insolence." Jarek stood at the helm of the Retribution, sweat beading on his forehead, but his expression was grim and focused. The battle was far from won, but humanity had sent its message loud and clear. The Empire was no longer the monolith it had once been. It was crumbling from within, its arrogance now a weakness, not a strength. "We've broken their lines," Thorne said, his voice steadier now, but still sharp with the adrenaline of battle. "They're regrouping, but they don't have the momentum anymore." "Good," Jarek replied, his eyes steely with determination. "Now, we finish what we started." As the battle continued, Jarek could feel the change. The Empire had always been seen as untouchable, a power beyond question. But now, humanity had shown that not even the Empire's might could withstand the rising force of rebellion. They had made the first strike, and they would see it through to the end. The retribution drifted within the darkness, its systems fully engaged, as the last remnants of the Empire's fleet scattered before them. The damage was undeniable, but the price of their success was heavy. The vibration of the hull beneath Jarek's feet told him all he needed to know. The ship had taken more hits than anyone cared to admit, but it was still holding together, and so were they. "All systems are operational, Commander," Thorne reported, his voice steady, though there was an edge to it. The bridge was quieter now, the calm before another storm. "We've disabled most of their communications, but they're regrouping. They'll be back, and with more force." Jarek stood at the command console, his eyes locked on the heads-up displays, the rapidly shifting data tracking every Imperial move. "Not soon enough," he muttered. "We can't let them recover." "Understood," Thorne replied, shifting to evasive maneuvers. "We can't afford another direct hit." Jarek's fingers clenched around the console. "It's not about avoiding them. It's about keeping them on the defensive. If they think we're retreating, they'll expose themselves. We need them to underestimate us, and we'll use that." Moments later, the Phantom Legion regrouped in the void, drifting in the stillness. The vastness of space felt oppressive now, as the weight of their position started to sink in. They had achieved a significant victory, but it was only temporary. There was a new storm brewing, one that was far more dangerous than the last. Jarek knew the Empire would come again, but this time, the strategy had to change. "Commander," a voice broke through his thoughts. It was Korak, his Zorani ally, his features flickering on a nearby display. "Your strike was successful, but we're not in the clear. The Empire won't leave us alone. You've made them bleed, but they're coming back stronger." Jarek met his gaze on the screen, his eyes steely. "They always do." Korak's sharp eyes narrowed. "We've hit their supply lines, but their forces are still vast. They've deployed a reserve fleet from the sector. They'll be here in hours." "Then we make sure they never reach us," Jarek replied. "I've got a plan, but we need to act fast. If we hit them while they're in motion, while they're still unsure of their footing, this could be it." Korak's expression shifted. "You're aiming for their command structure?" "Exactly," Jarek said, voice firm. "We cripple their leadership and the rest will fall apart, but we need to hit hard and fast. No hesitation. We need to send a message that we are the ones in charge." The battle began again in an instant. The Phantom Legion split into smaller strike groups, each ship moving in a carefully orchestrated formation. Jarek's hands flew over the controls, setting the course for the most dangerous assault of their campaign. The Empire's fleet had begun to regroup, but it was still scattered, vulnerable to another quick strike. And this time, they wouldn't see it coming. The first explosion was like a jagged ripple across the calm, a strike on the flank of an Imperial cruiser. The burst of energy disrupted their engines, sending the ship spiraling into the void, a metal hulk drifting helplessly. Then another, and another, as the Phantom Legion unleashed a devastating barrage that targeted their core defenses. "Targeting systems are down on multiple ships," Thorne called out, his voice tight with excitement. "They're losing control." "Keep pushing them," Jarek ordered. "Hit their command ships. Take out their leaders." The Empire's response was immediate, but it was uncoordinated. Their command structure was beginning to unravel as their fleet leaders scrambled to regain control. Jarek's fleet struck again and again, each blow carefully timed to keep them disoriented. The Empire's retaliatory fire came in waves, but it wasn't enough to break the momentum. Then came the next wave of Imperial ships, faster, heavier, more focused. They came in formation, advancing like a well-oiled machine, their weapons lighting up the darkness. The Empire had finally regrouped. Jarek's pulse quickened as he watched the incoming ships on the laser plasma display. This was the moment they'd been waiting for. Brace for impact, Jarek muttered to the bridge crew, his voice low but unwavering. The battle erupted again, this time on a far grander scale. The Retribution shuddered as the first wave of Imperial fire slammed into its hull. Red alert lights blared across the bridge, but the ship held together. The crew scrambled, shifting into action as the Imperial forces surrounded them. Jarek's mind raced. They had expected this, but even so, the sheer force of the Empire's retaliatory strike was staggering. "Status!" Jarek barked. "We're holding steady," Thorne said, voice strained. "Shields are at 50%, but we're taking heavy hits. Weapon systems are operational, but we've lost our rear defenses." Jarek gritted his teeth, staring at the display. "Send a decoy signal. Make them think we're retreating. We need them to chase us into the asteroid field." Thorne's eyes flicked to the console. "Understood. Sending the signal now." The Retribution shot forward, pulling away from the heart of the battle. Behind them, the Imperial fleet followed, hungry for the kill. But it was a trap. Jarek's fleet pulled them into the asteroid field, a dense area filled with floating debris. Perfect for guerrilla tactics. The Empire's ships tried to follow, but the dense field made it difficult to maintain lock-on with their weapons. The Phantom Legion launched a series of well-placed strikes, picking off the Empire's ships one by one as they struggled to maneuver. The battle had shifted again, the advantage now squarely in their hands. "We've got them," Thorne said, his voice steady despite the chaos. "Their formation's breaking apart. They're scrambling." "Good," Jarek replied, his voice cold. "Now finish it." The final strike was a coordinated attack on the Indomitable, the flagship of the Empire's fleet. The Retribution came in from the flank, launching a devastating assault that tore through its energy systems. The ship's shields flickered before failing completely, and in that final, desperate moment, the Empire's flagship was left vulnerable. Jarek's voice was grim as he gave the command, "Target the bridge." "Disable their command center." A series of calculated blasts hit the Indomitable's command deck, silencing the last coherent orders from the Empire. The flagship, once the pride of their fleet, was left crippled, its systems spiraling into disarray. As the dust settled, the Phantom Legion remained poised in the silence of space. The battle was over, for now. But the war had only just begun. Jarek stood at the command console, watching as the Empire's fleet, now broken and scattered, attempted to retreat. It was a temporary victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. "We did it," Thorne said, voice heavy with disbelief. Jarek's gaze remained fixed on the screens. "Number, we've only just begun." The battle had ended, but the war was far from over. Jarek Solan stood at the helm of the Retribution, his gaze fixed on the flickering laser plasma displays that now showed the scattered remains of the Empire's fleet. The wreckage drifted in the cold void, but there was no time to savor the victory. The Empire had been wounded, but it was still alive, and more dangerous than ever. "Commander," Thorne's voice interrupted Jarek's thoughts, sharp with urgency. "We've intercepted a new transmission. It's from Lord Vrax himself." Jarek's jaw tightened. He had been expecting this. The Empire wouldn't retreat quietly. "Put it through." The screen flickered for a moment, and then Lord Vrax's hulking form appeared. His eyes burned with fury, his face twisted in a sneer. Behind him, the dark corridors of the Indomitable's command center loomed, a reminder of the Empire's once mighty power. "You think you've won?" Vrax growled, his voice carrying the weight of 1,000 threats. "This battle is just a distraction. The Empire is far from defeated, human. You've made your mark, but it will be the last one you make." Jarek leaned forward, his voice low and controlled. "We've already shown you the cost of underestimating us, Vrax, and we're just getting started." Vrax's eyes narrowed. "You've won some battles, but in the end you will fall. The Empire does not crumble. It adapts, it strikes back, and it crushes all those who oppose it." "Then come and try," Jarek replied, his tone biting. "We'll be waiting." The screen went dark. Vrax's words hung in the air, but Jarek wasn't shaken. If anything, they only fueled his resolve. The Phantom Legion had dealt the Empire a heavy blow, but their enemy was far from finished. The next phase of the war would be a test like no other. "Are we ready?" Jarek asked, turning to Thorn and Rilla, who had been quietly observing the aftermath of the battle. They both nodded, their faces set with determination. "We've crippled their fleet, Commander," Thorn replied. "But Vrax's threat isn't empty. We've already detected reinforcements on the way, and we can expect a full-scale assault soon." Jarek clenched his fists. "Then we make our stand here. They'll come at us with everything they've got, but we can't back down now. The galaxy is watching. We take the fight to them." Thorn's eyes flicked to the console. "We've got a small window before they arrive. We'll need to hit them where it hurts." Jarek nodded. "We go for their command. We cut the head off the snake." The Retribution moved quickly, weaving through the scattered debris of the previous battle. Their next target was the Empire's primary communications relay station, located on a remote moon. If they could disable it, they'd cripple the Empire's ability to coordinate and retaliate. But this mission would be no simple strike. The Empire knew they were coming. The Phantom Legion would have to fight through an Imperial defense designed to hold back any force brave or foolish enough to challenge the Empire. "All ships, prepare for engagement," Jarek ordered. "We're not here to play games. We hit fast, we hit hard. No hesitation." The Retribution's hull shuddered as the fleet entered the moon's orbit, surrounded by the cold silence of space. But within that silence, there was a pulse, a threat waiting to unfold. "Enemy ships inbound, Commander," Thorn said, his fingers dancing over the controls. "They're moving to intercept us." Jarek's gaze hardened. "Activate all shields. Prepare to engage on my mark." The enemy fleet emerged from the darkness, two massive Imperial dreadnoughts, flanked by smaller attack cruisers. They were faster than expected, closing the gap between the Retribution and the moon's surface. The Empire wasn't wasting any time. They intended to stop them before they even touched the surface. Jarek's heart pounded, but he remained calm. "All ships, full throttle. Target the smaller cruisers first. We need to clear a path." The battle began in a flash of light. The Retribution's cannons roared to life, slashing through the void as their first shots landed on the smaller Imperial ships. The attack cruisers were swift and agile, but they couldn't match the firepower of the Phantom Legion. They tore apart in a series of explosions, leaving debris in their wake. But even as the first wave fell, the dreadnoughts loomed like shadows, their weapons unleashing a torrent of fire. Jarek gritted his teeth as the ship rocked under the assault. "Brace for impact," he commanded, gripping the sides of his chair. The Retribution shuddered again, but the shields held. "Keep moving! We need to get to that relay station." The battle was chaotic. Lasers sliced through the darkness, energy shields flickered, and the rumble of distant explosions filled the air. Jarek's crew moved with practiced urgency, executing evasive maneuvers, firing back with lethal accuracy. "We've lost 2 cruisers, Commander," Thorn reported, his voice steady. "The dreadnoughts are tough, but they're slow. We've got to keep the pressure on." "Then we don't stop," Jarek said, his voice firm. "We'll make them regret ever coming after us." Minutes later, the Retribution slipped past the final line of defense, the moon's surface looming ahead. Their target was just ahead, a towering Imperial communications relay, its cold metal surface glowing dimly under the harsh light of the distant star. "We've cleared the path," Thorn said, his tone laced with relief. "Engines are holding steady. We're almost there." "Good," Jarek replied, his eyes focused on the surface of the moon. "Deploy the infiltrators. Take out their power core. We can't afford to leave anything standing." The command was swift. A small group of specialized soldiers deployed from the Retribution, their boots crunching against the rocky surface as they moved toward the relay's core. They worked in silence, setting explosives, hacking systems, dismantling the heart of the Empire's communications network. Back on the ship, Jarek's eyes stayed locked on the countdown as the explosives were set. The silence in the room was almost unbearable, broken only by the distant crackle of the comms. "Explosives are ready," Rilla said. "The relay is as good as gone." "Do it," Jarek ordered. The explosion came in a flash of searing light, followed by a shockwave that sent tremors through the moon's surface. The relay station shattered, its systems obliterated in one fell swoop. The Empire's communications were severed, their ability to coordinate destroyed in an instant. Jarek let out a breath, his chest heavy with the weight of what they had just accomplished. One more step toward freedom. The Phantom Legion was now out of sight, leaving behind only the wreckage of Imperial pride. The battle wasn't over yet, but the tide had irrevocably shifted. The Empire had learned the hard way that humanity would not bow down, that they would never be the Empire's slaves. "We've done it, Commander," Thorne said, his voice quieter now, filled with respect. The blast that tore through the Imperial communications relay echoed like a seismic shock through the galaxy. Jarek stood at the command center of the Retribution, his eyes scanning the laser plasma displays that flickered with updated intel from the shattered station. The Empire had lost its primary means of coordinating its forces, and with it, their ability to mobilize a unified response. It was a significant victory, but the silence on the bridge wasn't one of relief. It was the uneasy quiet before the next storm. "That's a blow they won't recover from easily," Thorne said, his voice tinged with cautious optimism as he worked the tactical display. "They won't be able to organize their fleets the same way. We've thrown them into chaos." "Good," Jarek replied, his gaze fixed on the data scrolling before him. "But chaos breeds desperation. They'll react, and when they do, it will be with everything they have." Rilla, who had been standing quietly by the comms, spoke up. "Our scouts report multiple warships en route to our position. They're rallying what forces they can muster. The real battle is coming." Jarek's jaw tightened. "Then we make sure they regret ever thinking they could stand against us." The Retribution moved away from the remains of the Imperial relay, its path carved through the dark stretch of space. Around them, the Phantom Legion's ships weaved in and out of shadow, their advanced stealth technology giving them an almost ghost-like presence. But the calm was short-lived. As Jarek stared at the updated fleet movement reports, he knew their next strike would be different. "I've never seen anything like this," Thorne muttered, eyes glued to his console. "They're pulling everything they've got. The Empire is throwing everything at us now. Dreadnoughts, carriers, destroyers, even their specialized elite forces." "They know what this means," Jarek said, his voice steady. "They can't afford to lose again. This is their last chance to crush us." Rilla exchanged a glance with Thorne before speaking. "And we can't afford to let them. If we let them reorganize, they'll overwhelm us." Jarek turned toward her, his expression hard. "We won't let them." He paused for a moment, then added, "Rilla, set course for their flagship." "We end this now." The Retribution surged forward, cutting through the darkness toward the heart of the Empire's remaining fleet. In the distance, the Indomitable loomed large, its presence an unyielding reminder of the Empire's power. This was the moment Jarek had been preparing for, the decisive strike that would either cripple the Empire or spell their defeat. "Commander, enemy ships are closing in," Thorne reported. "They've picked up on our course." "Of course they have," Jarek muttered, watching as the Empire's dreadnoughts formed a tight perimeter around their flagship, the Indomitable. "They'll come at us hard. We have to keep them off balance. No one ship can take us out. We'll strike where they least expect." The battle began almost immediately. Energy blasts erupted from the Empire's ships, lighting up the void as the first rounds of fire tore into the Retribution's shields. Jarek's knuckles whitened around the armrests of his command chair as the ship shuddered under the onslaught. "Shields holding at 70%, Thorne called out, his fingers working furiously to keep their systems online. "But they're getting more aggressive." "Just a few more minutes," Jarek said through gritted teeth. "Keep the pressure on. Hit their destroyers on the left flank." The Retribution responded, its cannons lashing out in quick succession. The enemy ships faltered, their shields flickering as the blasts tore into their hulls. But the Indomitable remained untouched, a fortress in the chaos. Jarek's mind raced. "We've got to break their formation," he muttered. "Once their ships lose cohesion, we take them down one by one." As the Retribution danced between blasts, the rest of the fleet followed suit, launching strikes on the Empire's weaker points. The battle was brutal, each move calculated and executed with ruthless efficiency. But even as the enemy ships began to falter, something shifted. The Indomitable wasn't as invulnerable as it had seemed. Its advanced systems began to flicker, the once immense warship now struggling to keep up with the Phantom Legion's pace. "We're wearing them down," Rilla said, her voice clipped but triumphant. "Their shields are failing, Commander. We've got them on the ropes." "Keep the pressure on," Jarek replied, his eyes locked onto the display. "We hit them with everything we've got. This ends today." The Retribution surged forward, the cannons firing relentlessly as it bore down on the Indomitable. The ship's weapons roared to life, cutting through the enemy's defenses with devastating force. A sharp cry came over the comms, an alert that their rear shields were weakening. "Commander!" Thorne shouted. "They've launched a counterattack from the right, another dreadnought. It's targeting us directly." Jarek's eyes narrowed. "Full evasive maneuvers. Get us in position to flank them. We can't afford to lose the Retribution now." The battle raged on, the Empire's forces throwing everything they had into stopping the Legion. But the Indomitable, the last bastion of the Empire's power, was beginning to crack. The Empire had underestimated humanity, and now they were paying the price. Jarek leaned forward as the Retribution fired a final volley, its weapons lighting up the darkness as the first blast tore through the Indomitable's defenses. The flagship's core began to falter, its systems short-circuiting in the wake of the barrage. A guttural roar came through the comms as Lord Vrax's voice cut through the static, full of fury and disbelief. "You dare—" The transmission was cut off before he could finish. "That's it," Thorne said quietly, almost as if he couldn't believe it. "Their flagship is disabled." Jarek let out a long breath, his shoulders sagging slightly. "We've done it. They've lost." But the victory wasn't without a cost. The Retribution had taken damage, significant damage. The ship's hull was dented, its systems strained from the constant barrage. The battle wasn't over, but it had reached its breaking point. Jarek stood, his body aching from the strain of command, but his mind clear. The Empire was retreating, their forces scattered and broken. "We've won this round," Jarek said, his voice steady. "But we can't stop now. The galaxy has seen what we can do. We're just getting started." As the last of the Empire's forces limped away, Jarek stood at the bridge, eyes locked on the black void of space. The war wasn't over, but they had struck a blow that would echo across the galaxy. The Empire's once unchallenged might had been shattered. Jarek turned to his crew, his voice firm. "Prepare for the next phase. We rebuild, we strike back. The Empire will learn what it means to cross us." In the aftermath of battle, the Phantom Legion stood victorious, its message to the galaxy clear. The Indomitable lay broken, its command destroyed, and the Empire's strength had been shattered. But Jarek knew this was only the beginning. The road ahead would be long, but the first steps toward freedom had already been taken.